So welcome everyone who's joined us. And this webinar this afternoon, just so you know you're in the right one, is looking at memories and how people remember those who've died. Particular focus on those big two occasions, All Souls and Remembrance, and a hint about what we might do, particularly about helping people remember who are sad at Christmas. Before we get into some of the detail, I just kind of want to say a little bit about what I kind of hope that you'll take away from this, rather than perhaps not so much the practical things that I hope you will pick up some of those, but really I didn't know quite what to call this, but I've called it core intentions. My intentions in leading this with you all is that basically you leave feeling reassured that you can do things, that these events can happen and will happen, albeit in a different way, and have confidence in what we're offering. That you feel affirmed in the work that you're doing, and that knowing that you're doing a good job and actually trying to meet the changing situation in new and creative ways. And for me, I'm a great believer, as many of you will know, in the art of the possible. So we'll be trying to think through this session of what it is that we can do rather than what it is that we can't do. And one of the key things I want to talk about is the whole sense at the moment of what we're doing is becoming memory makers. And this phrase is based on a true story that happened to me about 25 years ago now, on my first visit to New Zealand. And it was New Year's Day, and New Year's Day is a bit of a thing in New Zealand, and there's about 6 families going for a big picnic for New Year's Day in a place called Pelorus Bridge. It was a lovely day, the picnics were all out, the food was out, blankets, etc, etc. And then the weather there is a bit like parts of Scotland, I think. It changes in an instant. And from nowhere came this huge hailstorm, and there was a big scurry, and everyone was grabbing blankets and shoving food that was getting wet into the cars, and some of it didn't quite make it. We all got into the cars, and then the storm passed by and everyone got out of the cars, and we had some teenagers with us, and these teenagers were not happy. There was quite a lot of moaning and groaning about the whole thing, and language like, well, this is terrible, this is the worst thing, it's a disaster. And one of the mums, who was a kind of host to this event, she looked at the people gathered and dripping wet and the food that was a bit soggy, and said, during your life, you will go to many New Year's Day picnics, because it's a thing in New Zealand, and they will all, after a while, all blur into one. This, today, is not a disaster, but it's a memory maker. This is the New Year's Day picnic that you will always recall. So I want us to be thinking about, as we do things that are different, that they're not disappointing or second best, but actually in many ways we're doing things that will stand out for people, that it will be the year when we did that thing, and that will become a very special memory. Something we already know is happening for people at weddings, as we offer to do them in a very special way for them during these difficult times. So I'm going to cover a little bit about where we are now, talk a bit about some of the frameworks I think we can work with, say a bit about what we can do, particularly around All Souls and Remembrance, and as I say, hint a bit about how that might pattern out for Christmas. Talk about how we communicate with people and tell them what's going on, show you some brand new resources that we've just developed. I will be focusing on the creative things and the possibilities and why we're doing what we're doing. Helping us to remember that this in particular, like all the things we do, is actually everyone's ministry. This isn't just about the one person, the ordained person, the lay leader, taking this on for everyone. In fact, I think engaging with our communities during this season of remembering is very much everyone's job, because we will need eyes and ears in the community to help people know what we are offering, and to find out the people who need to be included in what is on offer. And we will be drawing on everything we know, our experience, our training, our sense of vocation, to minister to people at this time. And also still drawing on our heritage as the Church of England, that's been walking alongside people, not for a year or two, not even for a decade or two, but generation after generation, century after century. And underpinning all of this will be the gospel, the good news of God's love in Jesus Christ. And of course, in this season of remembering, the gospel is just so important for us, as it always is. But that sense that in Jesus, death has lost its sting, and that we can begin to look forward to a moment when to live is Christ, to die is gain. And one day we will be united with him and all those we've loved but see no longer in eternity. So that's the good news that underpins all that we do. Again, a reminder to enter questions at any time during the webinar. So first of all, just a sense, cheerfully, the Church of England is still here for people. We are still going to be there in this season that's coming up. In spite of rumours that people keep throwing around in the media, Christmas will not be cancelled, Remembrance will not be cancelled, All Souls will not be cancelled. We are still there as churches. And each of you will be in a different context. And we are, in many cases, in different contexts. We're not just there physically, we're now there digitally as well. We might be doing things in a different way, and we'll hear more about that. And when we do encounter people, wherever we're encountering them, particularly those who are fringe to our community, our faith communities, then we're greeting them with welcome and delight. We are pleased that they want to engage with us, that they're asking questions, that they ask for the opportunity to be involved. And alongside that, everything we do, just as in every other context in our society, will be done safely and well in accordance with guidelines. And I find that really helpful right now, that we're actually moving so much into a culture now where it would be odd if we were not doing things properly and doing them wisely and well. It would be odd to arrive at any venue where people were not asking us to be distant and we weren't expected to wear masks. That's how it's becoming now. We are not doing anything exceptional. Every place is having to work in this way. But we need to communicate well to people what it is that's available at our churches, and perhaps manage their expectations about what's on offer. And underpinning it all is a sense, perhaps an attitude that sometimes we need to have, a confidence that what we do differently is not inferior or worse than what we would have done, but is okay. All too often as churches, we get apologetic for what we offer. I lose count of the number of churches I go to when I visit to take services on Sundays, where I'm greeted at the door with a list of what isn't very good. Oh, I'm sorry there aren't many people today. I'm sorry we haven't got an organist. I'm sorry we don't have any children here. Almost as is setting us up so that actually we know it's not really going to be very good. But let's do what we do with that sense of confidence, knowing that what we do differently will not be worse. It will simply be different and may indeed be a memory maker this year. Many of you will have seen me use this before, but it's always helpful to remind ourselves of the ways in which we meet people and work with them, looking at these axes, especially right now in this time when many people are approaching these times of the year, the things that the church might do for those who are fringe on the edge, with fear and anxiety about what is going to happen, worried about the future, worried about their own safety and well-being. And we know that we need to greet people in two ways. We need to greet them in a relational, warm, engaging way with all those words of, we're glad that you're coming, we want you to be able to do this, so that they start to feel a sense of anticipation about what we're offering and an excitement which moves them towards trust and delight. But alongside that, it's so important at the moment, we back that up with what we call process or information, that we give people good, practical, clear information about what is going on and what they can expect, so they grow in reassurance and confidence, and again that moves them to trusting us and becoming delighted by what happens, and that in turn reflects the fact that they can trust God and that God is delighted in them. So when we move into this season of remembering that we're talking about, which is really those days that take us from the 1st of November through to Armistice Day on the 11th, but also looking ahead a little bit to how that feels for those who are bereaved as they move towards Christmas. And who are the bereaved, and who are we thinking about? Well, it's always a very interesting thing talking about bereavement and bereaved, because the truth is it's not a time limited thing. And I sometimes say, do you know anyone who gets unbereaved? No, because once we have been bereaved, we are always bereaved. So we know at All Souls that the scope is very, very wide. But we might particularly this year be thinking about those who've lost someone through COVID-19 directly. We may indeed be very much wanting to think in our community about how to include and get in touch with those who've had restricted funerals since March, whether we've taken them or others have taken them. And then I think there's a very important group of people who were bereaved in the months immediately before lockdown, any time beginning of this year into before Christmas, who had hardly got used to their grieving. Perhaps they'd lost a life partner and were plunged into this sense of being isolated and cut off from others. And there will be people coming up, particularly at this time of year, with special anniversaries, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and we'll be wanting to remember in a particular way. And of course, there are those who are bereaved through the death of someone close to them, but also, as we know, other losses are going to interplay for people. And that's particularly true when we start thinking about remembering at Christmas as well, that some of that will have a focus that's not just about feeling lost because we have lost a person through death, but it might be because a relationship has fallen apart, or physically we're not able to travel to see people, or we haven't got a job anymore, or we're disappointed because we couldn't do XY event this year. So there'll be a lot of emotion around that sometimes is directly through death, but other losses then interplay and interconnect. And we know too, for many people, that sometimes a loss from years ago will suddenly come back into sharp focus because of something that's happening right now. So who are these people and what kind of age groups do they come in? And the reason I mention this is because it's probably one of the truly intergenerational events that we're talking about here, the opportunity to reach across the age groups when we think about people remembering and those who are bereaved. Always, every year, 75% of deaths are people over 75. And that means that every generation is impacted in different ways. Those who are baby boomers, 65 and over themselves, may be grieving the loss of a partner, or they may actually, if their parent has lived to be a good age, be grieving the loss of a parent, as they have to plan a funeral and work with them and manage their own grief. Behind them are the Gen X people. They too will be organising and managing the funerals, often of parents, and grieving. Millennials, I don't know about you, but I always think when I say millennial, I think they're all 20 because the millennium was in the year 2000, 20 years ago. But of course, that's not the case. Millennials are those who came of age in the year 2000, which means that right now, what we're looking at is people who are in their late 20s through to their early 40s. And actually, those midlife adults are finding a lot of these things difficult. Many of them have been grieving grandparents, experiencing loss in a new way. And they were the first generation who had that close contact with grandparents, often providing even daily childcare. Then behind them is Gen Z and the ones to come. Children, young people, young adults who have had their first experience of grief during this time. And it's been very different from anything they might have thought or known before. How are we going to see all those different age groups connecting? And of course, remembering the dead isn't just about remembering those who are close to us, especially at All Souls. It's not just about those who are relatives through marriage or through our family ties. It's about our friends. It's about our neighbours. Indeed, sometimes the person who turns up at an All Souls service might be the person who'd lived next door to Betty and Jim for 45 years, who wants to remember them now and is feeling their loss. And we also have in our heads at All Souls not just the one immediate loss that may have triggered us being invited, but all the losses we've ever known come into play. See, bereavement is a huge thing. Therefore, remembering is a huge thing. We do have death statistics for 2019, but we don't yet have officially. We will have by the end of this week the Church of England numbers. They will be lower than this. For the last few years, up until 2019, the number of deaths in England had actually been slowly rising, which we would have expected. They actually dipped in 2019, and of course they will have gone up again this year. But just over 500,000 people die. Church of England involved in around 128,000, 130,000 funerals, but that will be much lower last year and much, much lower this year. And this year saw in April 2020 the highest ever number of deaths recorded in a month in England. Even if we think that each death only impacts maybe 4 or 5 people, that means there are 2 million people who are impacted by bereavement and loss every year. And of course, in reality, we know that that is far more. And that means there are lots of people in our communities who will be feeling grief and bereavement at this time. So it's quite a challenge to think about how do we reach them, especially if they weren't the ones for whom we took a funeral. So we talk, and again, some of you have heard me say this before, about those who we have contact with. And often those are the ones we go to first in our minds. The people we met, the people we got to talk with, plan with a funeral, even if it was on the telephone, that we led the funeral for. We had time with them. We listened, we shared. We shaped the funeral, we care for them, we've got some contact. And actually beyond that, there's a much bigger group of people, the ones who were grieving alongside that family or that at that occasion. These are the ones we call the wide contacts, the people who just attend funerals. We don't get any contact details from them, but if they've been to a funeral that we've led, then they've had an experience of seeing the Church of England at work. They've got an awareness that this is something we do, and hopefully they've had a really positive memory. These are the people with whom we have completely lost contact this year, that wider group of people who will not have had any peripheral contact with our ministry. And some of them have been to other funerals led by other people in this time. How do we find those people in our communities if they want to do something to remember in this season? We have many different words that we use at this time. I've already mentioned funerals, which we're not talking about today. We talk about bereavement and grief in many ways describes the emotional response we have in that intense phase, which might be a month, a year, 2 years, when we really feel the loss of someone we care about really acutely. And bereavement is the phase in which we carry on living with that loss. And of course, that is where remembering comes in. And we carefully in life events use the word remembering to talk about the things we do around All Souls, and in fact some of the things we'll be doing in the season of Christmas. And it's very distinct from the word remembrance. It's really important we keep them separate, because to the public the word remembrance is absolutely clear. It's to do with the wars, it's to do with Poppies, and we have Remembrance Sunday and we have Armistice Day as well. So that's a really important time as well, because we also know that strangely for many people, although we're remembering the war dead and the armed services and all of those things, our own personal dead are also being remembered then as well. They come back to our mind on any occasion when we're thinking generally in a space, pausing, thinking about death. All of our losses will be in our minds as well. So just for a moment, just to say a little bit about grief, because some of the people that we may have contact with will still be in that raw phase of grieving, a phase that generates a lot of emotion, big questions, spiritual questions sometimes, when people are acutely aware of both the absence of the person they love, but also maybe becoming aware of the presence of others who support them or the absence of those who support them. And as a church, one of the great gifts we can have is time and care and space for people, not necessarily inside our buildings, but even around our buildings, just being there for people. And we have put out other resources to help churches support those who are bereaved. And just before lockdown, we launched an initiative called Loss and Hope, which is a cross-denominational initiative that exists to equip churches to support the bereaved. And now we have a course online, Bereavement Journey course, which is free to look at the moment. And that helps us to find out how to support those who are bereaved. So if you're interested in that course and you think this could be a really good thing for your people in your church to be involved with going forward, to learn how to do that, then look at Loss and Hope to find out more about doing that course, to think about supporting people in that phase of grief. We're talking today about those moments when people remember. And they may still be in that stage of grieving and be weeping and need to do that. Mind you, we can weep at any stage in our bereavement journey. And they may be remembering someone who died quite a long time ago. So what's remembering about? What's going on? Sometimes we've often thought it's part of a funeral that didn't happen well, but maybe that's less so at this moment. It marks the significance of something often as well. It might be a season or an anniversary. But really importantly, as well as giving thanks for celebrating a life, it is a space when people can own all the different emotions they feel. So in a remembering service or gathering, you can bring your sadness, your anger, and your happy memories as well, and have some time to be there. And interesting, the word remember means to bring something back together. And what we do in these services, gather our thoughts, gather all the people we've known, and traditionally, we've been able to gather with other people, and that's where we're thinking about how that can happen differently this year. People want prayer and blessing in that time, and they want to find some sense of comfort and hope from being there on that occasion. So I'm going to give you some frameworks to help us kind of think about what the different opportunities and the different ways we might construct this. Remembering can happen in different levels. It's quite helpful to think about this. Remembering happens at sometimes at a big national level, and we see that particularly around Remembrance Sunday, the civic things that are happening. And at this stage, there are no plans to do anything nationally, specifically, for example, about COVID yet. There will be probably in the future. And then there's those gatherings that happen in communities, and that might be through the church, but it might be through a school or another organisation as well. And then, of course, there's the way in which we remember personally, home by ourselves, thinking about the individual and grieving for ourselves and doing little things that matter to us. And we might do that over a long period of time. We might do it as a one-off. But mostly individuals are multiply remembered in all those different places and spaces. And spaces is really important, because what we're thinking about this year in a way that we haven't had to think about before is that this remembering, whether it's national, whether it's communal, whether it's personal, will happen in a number of different places. It won't have to happen in all of these, and some of us will find some of these more available to us than others. So what will happen indoors? That might be indoors in our church buildings or indoor in another building, such as a school, for example. What will happen outdoors? Again, around our church spaces and in our community spaces as well. How will we use, if we're able to, digital places? How will that be a space this year for remembering? And I think really importantly is, how do we acknowledge and allow people and equip them to do remembering in their domestic spaces, in their own homes? So thinking about those different levels and thinking about those spaces, what are some of the things that will be going on this year, and how might they impact where you are? On one level, this probably doesn't impact many of you at all, unless you happen to be listening here and you've got a very significant large parish church, or you're from a cathedral. These are what I call the big scale events, and these are more about Remembrance Sunday often, although again we do see these for All Souls as well. They're truly national often, but they also do happen like at a county level, cathedral level, or in a big metropolis or a large town or city. But one of the really important things this year to recognise, which we often don't think about, is that these services may well be broadcast. And of course, we know something like the Remembrance ceremony at the cenotaph will be broadcast by the BBC in whatever form it takes this year. And we know it will be very restricted. And actually, those services, including the ones the Church of England are putting out every Sunday, and obviously they'll be focused about remembering for All Souls, and they'll be focused about remembrance on the following Sunday. All of those services are available for people to watch, and they are important. And we might just be wanting to say, don't forget that is happening. And for many people who can't access anything else except television, that could be really important, as indeed will be the services coming through Daily Hope as well, that people can listen to if they really can't access digital or indeed see a television. So that's really important to think about. And those services are often balancing grief and gratitude, and they're focused on a particular issue taking place in a single time. One of the important things just to flag up this year is what we're talking about here is events that are about remembering, and we need to be careful that we don't start to muddy the waters around this remembering with bringing in things like giving thanks for the national health at this point, or specifically talking about those who have died with COVID. It is, as it always is, a time when we bring all our dead to mind, whatever cause they've died from. Some people think that these services that happen at a big scale are less personal. But interestingly, in a year where perhaps you've had a very restricted funeral and you might feel your loved one didn't feel very significant, to feel that they've been recognised and acknowledged in a big service somewhere, like a cathedral, might actually make them feel really valued and valuable. So again, do remember to point people to these things that will be happening. But most of us listening are going to be involved in a communal level service, something that happens in a parish church that is similar to the national story, but it reflects what's happening locally. And really importantly this year is how we build local partnerships, how we reach out to schools, to care homes, and particularly perhaps to funeral directors. Say, what would serve the bereaved in our community this year? What could we do together to share on this event, representing what's happened in your local community? That might be that you're thinking about the annual All Souls service and doing that in partnership with the funeral director, who will have contact with far more people who are grieving than we do through the funerals we've taken. Maybe you're thinking about the way you have to do a civic event around Remembrance Sunday and how that will work. But you may also be wanting to think, particularly as we go through into Advent and Christmas, are you thinking about doing frequent events, having special times, which could be digital, or could be a space that's available for people to remember their sadnesses and sorrows as we move into the Christmas season. And then, of course, there's the personal remembering, the things we do individually at home. There may be opportunities coming up about things like burial of ashes. There may be individual memorial services. But really want to think as well about the way in which people can remember in their domestic space. How do they do that when they're home alone? physically. They may come out and do something that allows them to remember their loved one in a special way. They may do something as well that's literally staying in their own home and pausing to remember. And as we do that and construct these services, then we know that there are certain moments that create particular memories, traditional moments, if you like. And these are some of them that we would normally include around All Souls and Remembrance that we're having to think about doing differently. For example, the reading of names, and many of us know that list can get ever longer. How might we do that this year? Maybe we'll just have a one-off moment and we'll tell people that at 5 o'clock someone will be in church, or a team of someone's reading all the names, and everyone will know that it's happening on that day. We shouldn't lose the sense of things done in solidarity being really effective. Many of us now will remember, it seems like a long time ago, when at a set time every week people stepped outside and clapped for the NHS, a moment of solidarity. When we've been asked all to light a candle, for example, or put a light in a window to remember something at a certain time. Solidarity can be really important. So knowing that something's happening at a time we can all pause and do it. 2 minutes silence when we're all standing in the middle of a shopping mall has power. Lighting candles is really important to people, particularly on All Souls. And then with Remembrance, we've got these other symbolic actions as well. The bugle, the laying of wreaths, how might they be reflected this year? And alongside that, in the way we construct whatever we're doing, how do we give people the hope of peace and eternity? How do we allow there to be some of the traditional music listened to and the words said, but with that time that's really valuable for silence and stillness to happen? And how will we bring together the personal losses in the big story of God's love in a way that can be effective for as many people as we are able to be in touch with? So let's have a think for a moment about what All Souls might look like, some ideas for that. Think about whether it's right in your situation and how much you will be able to gather people. Obviously, limited numbers can be there depending on the size of your church. And then we need to think, who is it that could be there? It's quite easy for us to start falling into thinking we'll invite our regulars to come to All Souls. But if you think about your normal All Souls service, who are the people who are the fringe contacts who rarely come to anything else? Maybe it's time for thinking the regulars could do their remembering in another space, either the previous Sunday or something, and you focus on All Souls on trying to invite some people. There may be representative groups, or there may be one or two you've had contact with who can come into that space for whom there's a real need. But manage the expectations of what's going to be possible. You may want to think about something like having, I've heard of one or two doing this on All Souls afternoon, for example, having your church open and telling your community that there'll be time for people to pop in, to obviously bearing in mind all the social distancing and so on, to do something, to sit, to light a candle. Now, as I said, you want to do something with reading of names, but really importantly, you could use your churchyard creatively, or your outdoor space if you've got one, or a community space if you haven't actually got a churchyard. So for example, you might like to think of doing something like making the shape of a cross, mapping that out in your churchyard, and inviting people to bring a stone with them. You don't provide the stones, they bring one, place it inside the cross, so that a cross is being built up during the week with all sorts of names on from those who are being remembered. And if you're using digital means as well, you might be able to video and film that as an unfolding event for your community. If you don't, it doesn't matter, just make it physical. You could do that as a cairn of some kind. You might have a special big tree in your churchyard and invite people to place stones at the base of that tree as a sign that they are remembering and thinking of people at this particular season. Also, we think it's really important that you enable people to have prayer moments at home, that you say that that's an okay thing to do. Why not take time on this day to pause? We'll all be pausing at a certain time to remember all those we've loved but see no longer. And then think about your digital offering. Can you use Zoom? And Zoom and streaming are very different. When we use Zoom, we have to invite people. So if you do want to do a Zoom service for All Souls, how are people going to get the details to be able to be there? And sometimes that's because their neighbours will tell them and give them that information. But make sure people know how to do that. On the other hand, if you stream something, it's much more open access, but you still have to make sure people know where to find that service if it's going to be streamed and you've pre-recorded some things and put them together. Remembrance Sunday is different and has some different challenges. We work with very particular partners around this. We work with the British Legion, we work with cadet units, and depending where we are in the country, with local military representatives and so on, and the police. Expectations will be really important here. But please remember this, we're not living in a culture at the moment where everybody is organising big events. And in some ways, to try and plan something large might go really against the grain of what's happening nationally and locally where you are. So just manage expectations and think about how you could do that. Use the community creatively. So for example, if you can't have a parade, but you could say at a certain time, invite people to stand outside their houses and line the streets as perhaps a few representatives walk past, something like that, thinking through those things. Thinking about whether this should be indoors or outdoors and how many things should happen. Some of us have been in towns or suburbs, communities where we have to be doing that kind of split personality thing where we've got to be in 4 different places at once, doing different kinds of remembering. Maybe this is the year to think about where is the right place to be physically and how to make that more accessible, including accessible at home, and not being afraid to encourage people to watch and engage through the television rather than passively using it as a moment for prayer and reflection. And then we start to think about Advent and Christmas, how we're going to build towards that. Nationally, our theme is going to be comfort and joy, and we'll need to balance that carefully as we head into this season. Much loss will be around, much disappointment will be around, and perhaps thinking about the services that we're going to put in that allow people to feel differently at Christmas will be especially important this year. And we'll be providing some liturgies for that, even if you've never done that before. 1 or 2 are already available on our website. Maybe you'll want to make some clear open times. If you're feeling sad, why not pop into church and telling people? I think there's a great opportunity to do things with prayer trees. And I use the word tree because it might not be a tree, it might be something different, either inside or indeed outside the church, where you invite people to come and put names and thoughts on that tree, and you commit to having people praying for those every day, every week, allowing that to grow and be part of the Christmas story. Using community spaces. I love all these things that people are doing with angels in windows or whatever it might be, using the community creatively and making sure you're in partnership with other people, particularly, as I said, funeral directors, care homes, schools, as we try and think, not just as Christmas as being straight to, you know, nostalgia and sort of froth and happiness, but acknowledging and holding people's loss and pain in that as well. And then we need to communicate what we're doing. Think about where you tell people things. Every community has interesting places where we can give information, and I'm slightly depressed often by the way in which churches have no information that's about what we're doing in our notice boards or colourful creative posters out there, or in the village shop. This is the way we're doing things this week. And telling people as well, using your social media, using your website, making sure things are up to date. And what it is you're telling them, how are you going to make sure they know what's happening and how to join in, using a website or even a parish magazine, if that's still what you do, to give information. We're less inclined to use the word invitation at the moment because invitation implies that everybody can turn up at something and maybe they can't. But giving you information about what is going on in this church and how you can join in where you are would be the thing to think about, because it builds that ongoing relationship with families. Some of the new resources we're making available, in a moment I'll show you what they look like. One of the things we're producing, which is marginally innovative, is we're making available either as an A4 or indeed as an A3 poster. You can't necessarily do that yourself at home. The A4 you can print off free at home, is what we're calling a community poster. And these will be in 2 designs, and we call them Forget-Me-Not and Poppies, and I'm sure you'll get straight away what the difference between them is. And the poster go up in your notice boards, it could go up in a shop, could be anywhere, could be inside, outside your church. And it will have on it, as well as information coming up soon, this is who we are, go to our website, and it will have a QR code on it, which anyone who knows how to do it, more of us are able to do that now, is look at that and it will give you some specific prayers that you can use right there or take home and use at home as well. So prayers on a poster is one of the things we're making available. We're also producing what we're calling information cards or invitation cards that you could email, because they'll all be emailable, or send to someone that tells them, if you want to specifically invite a family to come to something or to do something, it isn't always to come to something, you'll be able to do that. One of the newest things we've developed is 2 prayer cards I'll show you in a moment that are for use at home. Very, very simple, very lovely looking cards. One for All Souls, one for Remembrance Day, with a core prayer on that someone could be at home watching you perhaps, or just watching television or listening to the Daily Hope line, and they will have something in their hand that means they can join in that moment. And there's also many creative ideas that are emerging. And as most of you know now, all of these things can be found on our, oh, sorry, I forgot my revelation. These are what the designs look like. This is the first time we've been showing them today. These will not be available, just so you don't all rush off to get them now, till Monday, Tuesday next week. We've been working, my team has been working amazingly proactively to get these up and ready. So this is the way it looks for a prayer card at home for All Souls. Loving God be with me on this special day of remembering. People could write names in. You can put your own details on the back, print it off yourself, email it as well. And it's got a simple prayer on to use at home. And then we have another one, which I really like actually, which is for Remembrance Sunday in particular. And it has those words from the Remembrance service on the front and allows people to join in at home. We also have available online a very creative prayer, some language to do this, and we may be videoing this as well, which involves using the poppy itself as a symbol. You know, actually touch the poppy and pray as you do that. That will be a powerful thing to get people to use this year, that symbol of prayer. These are available next week. Sadly, if you buy them ready printed, they will not be free. We unfortunately can't carry on doing that, but they are free to download and to use yourself. You get those things from either the Church Support Hub or the Church Print Hub. Be reassured that you can do this. You can do something this year that allows people to remember in a different way. And we have a message that's so needed at the moment, a message of hope, a message of compassion, a message of community as well. And be affirmed. You are all doing such a great job. You are amazing in the way you've responded in new and exciting ways to the need that's out there. And it's great. You can do these things. And work with the art of the possible. One of the ways I tend to think about this at the moment is if we were able to gather physically, that would be the icing on the cake. Let's think positively about all the ways we can engage people when they're not in a big gathering. And then if a miracle comes, that day will come, then that will be a bonus. And think about being a memory maker. This isn't about disappointment. This isn't about it's a disaster. This is about finding moments of delight that we said, you know, do you remember that year when we got like a card to hold at home on Remembrance Day? That was really special, wasn't it? Do you remember that day when we stood outside on Remembrance Sunday? Do you remember when, you know, we did something different that we've never done before? We took the stones to the churchyard and remembered people. That was really good that year, Vicar. Can we do that again? You all know how that unfolds. So become memory makers in this season. As I've said, you get information and resource. Church Support Hub, all the downloads. Church Print Hub, where you buy ready printed things. It'll all the new resources be there from the beginning of next week. We put creative ideas up there. We put liturgies up there for you to use as well, and prayers that you can use and reprint yourself. Thank you all for some of you. I've been checking in. Some of you have already sharing some wonderfully creative ways that you're approaching things as well, which is fantastic. And just that message, you know, it is about doing what we can, not what we can't, and really thinking, how do we help people through this, and that pastoral care that we offer. And thank you all for all that you do in your parishes. So hope to see you all sometime physically as well, but thank you for being here. And I'll just close with a prayer. Loving God, thank you that you hold every single person in your heart. Even when we cannot do that, no one is forgotten by you. Everything we do is known by you. And thank you for that. And thank you too that you have equipped us with the gifts that we need. Help us now to think with care and compassion, to think with creativity and imagination, so that we might reach out with your love and that great message of hope in Jesus to those in our communities. And we continue to pray too for all who are involved in helping us work through this pandemic. for those who are involved in developing guidelines to keep us safe, for those who are seeking a way forward for this nation and every nation, and particularly for those who are working in laboratories and other facilities to find a way through in terms of a vaccine and a protection for us all. We do pray for those. We do ask you that there could be a hope that comes for our culture and for our society and for our world, but above all, that we will all know more and more of the great hope that we have in you. Be with us in our places now. Bless us as we go into the rest of this day and evening. In Jesus' name, amen.